of the day. When you get an opportunity in this game, you make a play. The playmakers on three. 1, 2, 3.
Touchdown, Kansas City! The Chiefs are right in the thick of it, baby! And hello once again, Chiefs Kingdom. It is time to rev up Defending the Kingdom. Mitch Holthus with you, voice of the Chiefs, along with senior team reporter. I got to get this right since you've been duly promoted and long overdue, Matt McMullen, a.k.a. the Matt Stat. This episode we're going to call Who Leads. We are going to get into team leadership, not only for the Chiefs, but what works in the National Football League and why the Chiefs Kingdom, which is concerned about this topic, can get excited about the future of the internal leadership of this team. But before we do that, Matt, it's tradition. Let's go around the world in Defending the Kingdom.
We're going to go around the world. So I typed up all 5 million names and places that we had. We decided to consolidate to 13 different people. For now, just for now.
Stay patient.
For now. And I read all of them. 13 seconds. Why not? You know, it still just has a warm place in my heart. So we're going to pick 13.
Do it, Kels.
Just do it. From people around the world. So we have Julius in Norway, Timo in Germany, a longtime listener. Michael is listening from Northamptonshire, England.
Nice.
We've got Juan Pablo in Guayaquil, Ecuador. Khalid in West Africa. And then, I didn't mention it, but we also have Australia and Asia. So we were represented by every continent this time around, with the exception of the elusive Antarctica. But oh well.
We still search.
Still searching for that one. We also have Daniel. He declared Queen Creek, Arizona as the Kansas City Red Sea. Love that. Jonathan declared his outpost in Nashville, Tennessee as Chiefs Kingdom of Titanfall. I'm a fan of that one. Nick in the historic Northeast in Kansas City, Missouri. He was listening, and he was also at Draft Fest a few weeks ago, so shout out to you, Nick. We've also got Ralph listening, driving down I-10 in western Arizona. Don declared Oxford, North Carolina as Chiefs Kingdom East. David declared himself the guardian of the western slope of Colorado. I always love the Kingdom Defenders out in Colorado. Jeff and Deb are in Yorba Linda, California, otherwise known as West Coast Chiefs Kingdom. And then lastly, one that you'll like, Morgan is listening from Ocean Springs, Mississippi, but she's from Plainsville, Kansas.
Wow. Oh,
Yeah.
the Cardinals.
Yeah. Plainville or Plainsville?
Plainville.
Plainville. Can't get that wrong.
Arch rival of the Big Red of Smith Center.
Yeah.
Arch rival.
Yeah.
Spilled a lot of blood in Plainville. But, hey, awesome to hear all of this. I got a couple fun ones here. Gary Stevenson, he's from Metamora, Illinois, which I looked this up. It's just northeast of Peoria, really in the heart of Bears country, quite honestly. This is big Bears country.
Battleground.
Gary comes to every game. Metamora, Illinois, to the hallowed ground of GEHA Field at Arrowhead Stadium. Every game, Gary Stevenson. And actually hooks up with people that we know, the St. Joe Mafia, we call them. They're not the Mafia, but they're awesome folks in St. Joe that we see at training camp every year. And then another one, this one's kind of fun. This was a couple, ran into them actually. I was going to crash Patrick Mahomes' wedding, decided not to do it, get arrested. But getting ready to do a whale watch, right? It's cool. And this guy goes, "Are you Mitch Holthus?" Like, it's one of those. And I'm like, oh, okay, yeah. But he goes, "I've never been to Arrowhead. I listen to every Defending the Kingdom. I watch all your shows. I watch IV Chiefs Insider. Love Matt. Love you. I've never been to a game. I grew up in the shadows of the Oakland Coliseum.
Wow.
Never been to a game. But he's the biggest Chiefs fan ever."
Why is he a Chiefs fan?
He was the anti in his family. Everybody's
Okay.
Raiders fans.
Yeah.
And so he became the anti, and it was back in the days of Lenny Dawson, the choir huddle. And
That's cool.
so this guy adopted him, and there we are. Another great Kingdom story. But I go, like, dude, you just got to come to Arrowhead for a game. He's never been to Arrowhead.
Yeah, come for a Raiders game.
Come for the Raiders game. Let's do it.
Yeah.
So anyway, we have some fun with those folks. And I don't know if you saw it on Twitter. I retweeted it. A farmer in Aurora, Nebraska has a corn planter, for you folks in agriculture, a corn planter that is painted in Chiefs red with the logos. Like we see vans, like the people use tailgating and buses and vans. This is a corn planter. That's the coolest thing I've ever seen. This guy custom painted for the Chiefs Kingdom. So there you go. Love it. Love the kingdom. Love the spirit of the kingdom. Comes in all shapes and sizes and from all the continents. Sans Antarctica. So get in here, Admiral Byrd. Let's go. Okay.
Shackleton.
Speaking of Speaking of explorers or people that have to have leadership, I know you get asked this a lot, and we've been asking every also way, shape, or form about concern about the leadership for the 2022 Kansas City Chiefs, especially on the defensive side of the ball. Melvin Ingram has now signed with the Miami Dolphins. He was great last year as a leader for this team, and we know Tyrann Mathieu now a New Orleans Saint. But it leads us to and begs the question, who leads for this Chiefs team? As many have predicted the demise of the Chiefs in 2022, you and I think differently. And you and I look at this leadership component very differently. So let's get into, and let me give you the characteristics in my brief 28 seasons in the National Football League, what I've learned that leaders in this league have to have. And one is they have to have performance before leadership. You have to have performance, and not just performance, Matt, but consistent performance. I can't be a flash in the pan and then yell at you to do your job if I'm not trying to do it better than you or doing it better than you. And like the Darryl Greens of the world come to mind, the people that have played at a consistent level, at a high level for years and years. Derek Johnson is another guy that comes to mind in the Chiefs' kingdom. And then thirdly, have to handle flashpoints. One of the underrated parts of Coach Andy Reid in his 9 seasons of winning here in Kansas City is every year, sometimes 2 a year, there have been flashpoints where the season could have come off the rails. Last year, at the end of October, a 3-4 start. Again, everybody predicting the demise of the Chiefs. Okay, that being said, your thoughts on these characteristics of leadership, and we're going to dive into who we think could be potential leaders for this team.
Yeah, well, I think being a good leader is a subjective thing, right? I mean, leadership, you can't quantify it. You can't say this guy is this good of a leader, and that's just a fact. I mean, leadership is subjective, and people lead in different ways, and different people respond to certain leadership styles in different ways. And I think that right now the Chiefs, in terms of their personnel at some certain position groups, are going through a bit of a phase here of transition where there have been some players that have been here a long time that we look at as leaders, and they're just not here anymore. And it's been in different areas. Think about the offensive line last year when Mitchell Schwartz retires, Eric Fisher moves on. I mean, those are your bookends for a long time. Those are the leaders along the offensive line, and they move on. And we'll talk about some new guys along the offensive line that came in last year and were tremendous leaders right away. But it's in other areas this time around. Anthony Hitchens at linebacker, he's not here anymore. And he's been one of those guys in the middle of the linebacking core. It's been here a very long time. The younger players have looked up to Anthony Hitchens. The receiver room has a ton of new faces. I mean, Mecole Hardman, in terms of guys that have been here for several years, is basically the only guy that's still here from that group. A lot of new faces in the receiver room. And Tyrann Mathieu, as you mentioned, is the biggest one because he's always been revered for his leadership. We've seen it, and Tyrann's been a great leader during his time in Kansas City, but he has moved on. Now, when you hear about all this turnover, at first it could be kind of alarming. Like you said, like you kind of worry about that. But it's also an opportunity when you have a lot of good young players who are maybe ready for that next step. They can move into that leadership role. And it's really an exciting time. If we didn't have the young players in the position to do that, that's where it's troubling. But a lot of the players that we'll talk about that have joined this team in recent years or who have been waiting for their chance, I think this is a big season for them to really step up and be that leader. And I think they can help continue the culture that we've enjoyed for years and years, beginning with those guys. So it's an exciting time, I think, for the leadership on this team, and particularly on defense.
Very well stated, and it's why we are dedicating this Defending the Kingdom podcast to that very thing, who leads. Now, let me give you an example of what I think is the gold standard, and he wears a gold jacket here, but he's near and dear to the hearts of many people who work in the Chiefs Kingdom who came with Coach Reid from Philadelphia, and that's Brian Dawkins. Okay, Brian Dawkins played in the National Football League for 16 seasons. He was a safety, hard-charging, hard-hitting safety. His career was a pinnacle of sustained success, consistency, reliability, and a servant spirit. This guy, Brian Dawkins, went to 9 Pro Bowls. He was a 5-time All-Pro, and it's just very interesting that they have the Brian Dawkins Lifetime Achievement Award at Clemson, which was his alma mater. And it's interesting, Barbershop, Sean Barber was going to join us today, but guess where he's at? He's at the Brian Dawkins golf tournament in Philadelphia because he played with Brian Dawkins.
What a flex, though. Like, it's a humble flex. Like, yeah, I'm going to text Shop, see if he can come do DTK. And I'm like, that sounds great. And then, actually, he can't go. He's in the Brian Dawkins golf tournament. I'm just like, what? That's pretty cool. Good for Shop.
Well, but Dawkins was the epitome of what we're talking about in strong, consistent leadership in the right way. And there's two guys in this building, well, three guys, because Andy Reid just said he was like the cornerstone of their teams. But Rick Burkhalter, who's our vice president for sports performance and considered to be the top athletic trainer in the National Football League, just swears by Brian Dawkins, talks about his year after year after year influence on the entire football team. And then Rob Alberino, who's the vice president we know for content and production, who was around Doc for a long time. But that now leads us into this discussion. Now, Brian Dawkins was a safety, but you look at the safeties on this team, and a couple guys I want to bring up here, I'll get your thoughts on him, would be Justin Reid. First and foremost, the Chiefs picked him up from the Texans in the offseason as a free agent. And then Juan Thornhill. Okay, Juan Thornhill now is in his fourth year in this system. Remember, he was having an outstanding rookie year. The last regular season game, he tears his ACL. He misses the run to Super Bowl 54 in the championship. I remember seeing Juan after the game. Everybody's in euphoria, and he's so excited. But he was sitting in front of his locker like, I want to be a part of this. I was not on the field for this. But to me, and let's get into these two guys, because to me, they are potential leaders for this team, not just in 2022, but beyond.
It's funny because if you look at the safety position for the Chiefs, we've enjoyed some really great leaders over the years, and two in particular are Eric Berry and Tyrann Mathieu. But what's funny about them is they were both great leaders in totally different ways. Like Eric Berry was very much of a silent warrior. Like he would lead by example, and he'd be loud when he needed to be, but kind of a quiet guy, honestly, Eric Berry. And Tyrann Mathieu was the opposite. I mean, he would lead by example, but also be Mr. Rah-Rah, and it worked, and it helped lead the Chiefs to a Super Bowl championship. But it shows that different kind of styles in terms of leadership can be successful. And Justin Reid, I'm excited to see what kind of leader he is. We know what he did in Houston, and he was a tremendous leader there. And I think it says a lot about him because particularly the last couple of years, that team has really struggled. And it would be really easy, particularly as a young player, to really maybe not give it your best or not care about being a leader in that situation, but he did by all accounts. I mean, he was a tremendous leader there, even though they weren't winning football games. But we don't know what kind of leader he'll be here yet, but what we can see is what he's done already in Kansas City, and it's been very obvious that he is interested in being a leader. And not everyone is, and that's not a bad thing. Some people just don't want to be a leader on their football team, but Justin Reid clearly wants to be one, and you can see him reaching out to his new teammates, doing stuff on social media, being very active on social media, encouraging fans and his teammates about next season, and also doing stuff in the community. I mean, Justin Reid is already incredibly involved in Kansas City, and he only got here, like a month ago? So it's very obvious that Justin Reid wants to be a leader here. I can't wait to see what kind of leader he will be. But, when you lose a guy like Tyrann Mathieu, you want to replace him with a guy that wants to be a leader on the back end. And I think we have that in Justin Reid. In terms of Juan Thornhill, I'm excited for Juan because earlier I mentioned how maybe some younger players are coming up and it's their turn to be a leader, right? Well, he might not seem like he's very old. He's 26, but if you look at players in the secondary, he's tied with Lonnie Johnson for the second oldest among anyone in the secondary. Deion Bush is the oldest at 28, but Juan Thornhill, not very old, but a veteran in terms of players in the secondary for the Chiefs. And really, this is his opportunity to step up and be a leader in that room. I know he's been one since he's been here, but really now, with some of the older players no longer in the secondary, it's his time. It's his chance. And younger players come in here. A guy like Brian Cook, they're going to follow Juan Thornhill around, see how Juan Thornhill practices. What's he say? It's going to stick with them a little bit more. How do you study? And I think that kind of thing is so important. And the great thing about Juan is I think he understands that. Not all young players kind of understand that, but I think Juan does. So for both these guys, Justin Reid and Juan Thornhill, different kinds of personalities, but really a perfect mixture, I think, in this DB room.
So again, to think about the characteristics of what constitutes an NFL player leader, and it's necessary to have player leadership. We know there's strong leadership with head coach Andy Reid and this coaching staff, strong coordinators as leaders, but there has to be locker room leadership. And another characteristic, so consistent performance over a long period of time. 2, handling flashpoints. 3, is also waiting your turn. I'm glad you mentioned that because let's take Justin Reid. Justin Reid played with Tyrann Mathieu in Houston. He was a teammate in the Texans with Tyrann Mathieu. He also grew up not far from Tyrann Mathieu in LSU country. He just decided to go to Stanford. His brother played at LSU. The other part of Justin Reid and Juan Thornhill is you got to weave back through their past, because not only do they wait, they defer to the leader that's already in place. They don't battle that leader. They wait and learn. Think of Patrick Mahomes. We'll get to him in a second. But he waited and learned because Alex Smith was the leader of the team that in 2017. Justin Reid, the same thing. He has waited his turn. But he was a high school team captain back in Dutchtown, Louisiana. They were an outstanding program. He goes to Stanford, which is a school that flourishes in the fact that not only are you getting this incredible education, but they work on leadership. His undergraduate was management science and engineering major. I mean, there's a lot to Justin Reid in planning and developing a leadership. Juan Thornhill, same thing. Went to a smaller high school in Southern Virginia, but he was the leader of not only the football team, but of that school. Same thing with the University of Virginia. This was a high school quarterback. This is a guy that has shown consistent performance, and I think he's been underrated and lived in the shadows. But he, too, has waited his turn because he had to be a teammate with Tyrann Mathieu. He didn't work against Tyrann Mathieu. But Juan Thornhill's 38-11 as a starter. Consistent performance, consistent winner. 5 interceptions, the pick 6 that he had his rookie season. He has not missed a regular season game. And I think we would win a bet if we put that out. They're going like, well, he's missed some time. Well, he missed the postseason in 19, but he fought his way back from that ACL injury. If you weave back through Juan Thornhill's life, the same with Justin Reid, to me, built to be a potential leader.
I mean, definitely. And if you think about Juan, he's now several years removed from that ACL injury. Those things are tough to come back from. And I don't mean just physically being out there. I mean truly being yourself again. And he even mentioned that after the first year back, that it's hard to go out there. You have to, first of all, trust it, but also just find your athleticism again. Find what made you such a great player in the first place. And to his credit, he was pretty good in that second season, even coming off of the injury. But now being several seasons removed, and with the additions the Chiefs have made in their secondary, I really think Juan is just going to flourish this year. So I can't wait to see what he can do both as a player and as a leader. And another note on Justin Reid, you mentioned his brother Eric. I think that is a big reason why he is the player that he is cerebrally, because Eric Reid had been in this league a long time before Justin, and I read an article after we signed Justin about how he would hang out with his brother and ask him just, how do you watch film? How do you go about certain things? Because his brother was already in the league. And having that influence and that advice when you're a young player, it makes you wise beyond your years. So even though Justin Reid is a very young player in this league and has only been in the league for a couple of seasons, really, 4 seasons, right, in the NFL, he goes about himself as a player that's been around much longer because he has a brother who has been. So I think that helps him a lot, both as a player and as a leader, and it'll help the Chiefs over the next several years.
Another guy, he was around Kareem Jackson in Houston. So it wasn't just Tyrann Mathieu, it was also Kareem Jackson, who's proven to be an outstanding safety in this league over a long period of time. And it's just, he learned, instead of bucking those guys and thinking he's the smartest dude in the room, he's been around a lot of alpha dudes in his life. Same thing with Juan Thornhill. He's been around a lot of alpha dudes, not only in this league, but other spots in his life. But to me, they are poised and ready to go. The other thing, and this goes back to Brian Dawkins, you're really on defense, you want 2 positions to be your leaders. One, obviously, is linebacker. We're going to get to Nick Bolton next. But the other is safety. Why? You need in baseball, let's give you a baseball analogy. Who do you want to be one of your strong leaders of your team in baseball? And they're hard to find. Are catchers. Think of Salvador Perez. He's the only guy that has the entire game in front of him. He can see the whole game in front of him. All the other 8 players on defense and the hitter and the whoever's on base. Safeties are the same way. All 21 of the other humans on the field are in front of them most of the time. So it's good to have a safety who can understand from a football standpoint to have them be a leader. So safety is another good position, or is a good position to have a defensive leader. On this Defending the Kingdom, again, we're exploring who leads, who takes over in leadership roles for this 2022 team. Now let's move to linebacker on the defensive side. And Nick Bolton did not disappoint. You were so excited when we drafted Nick, so was I, but he did not disappoint in the least. This was one of the top-performing rookies in the league last year. When you look at his tackle total and his tackle for loss total, it was somewhat historic.
Yeah, he was incredible. So I don't want to get this wrong. I'm doing it off the top of my head, but I believe he was one of just 9 rookies since 2000 to have 110 total tackles and 10 tackles for loss in a single season, and the first since Darius Leonard. I mean, he was just awesome, and a lot of that was kind of being a part-time player. Nick was just incredible. I think he was everything we could have hoped for when you're looking at a rookie, a second-round pick at linebacker, and he's earned himself now an opportunity to be not just a huge playmaker and a starter on this team, but a big-time leader, because Brett Veach has mentioned it. He's going to be the middle linebacker and the green dot on this team. Huge responsibility as a second-year player, but based on what we know about Nick, he can handle it. I think back to training camp last year when there were some injuries in the linebacker core. Willie Gay was hurt, and so was Anthony Hitchens. So Bolton, who they were planning on easing into things, all of a sudden was like the dude at linebacker, and his first couple snaps, one of them he had a pick 6. He had a deflection. He was awesome in his first practice in that role that continued over the next several practices. And then as the season got going, really every game he just seemed to get better. I remember there was a time in the season opener when Baker Mayfield was scrambling, and Nick stood his ground and stopped him. And after the game, they were like, "Were you a little bit nervous there?" He's like, "Yeah, but once I hit him, it was just football again." And I really think from that moment, all Nick Bolton did all year long was grow, and he's earned this opportunity now to be a major leader on this team with Hitchens no longer in town.
And the big plays, the scoop and score against Denver was a defining moment of the 2021 season. But Nick, too, if you go back and look all the way back to Lone Star High School in Frisco, Texas, and then at Mizzou might have been the main leader. At least that's what Mizzou was saying. I mean, he was the 2020 team captain. He gets Mizzou through COVID and was the centerpiece for that football team. The other part of it, remember, the characteristics of an NFL leader, performance has to precede leadership. 2, you have to perform over a consistent period of time. 3, you have to handle flashpoints. 4, you wait for your turn. And he waited last year. Instead of trying to have a coup d'etat against Anthony Hitchens, he soaked Anthony Hitchens' teaching in. He learned it. Anthony was a willing teacher. Same thing where Alex Smith was a willing teacher for Patrick Mahomes. But Nick soaked it in. I'm excited for Nick Bolton. Not only is he back in 32, folks, he's switching numbers back to his collegiate number of 32. But I'm excited for Nick Bolton in an increased role, even in his second year, of providing much what he did at Mizzou, not just on the field, Matt, but off the field.
And I mentioned earlier how guys lead in different ways. Nick leads in kind of a different way. First of all, he leads by example big time. You mentioned earlier about how your performance has to kind of back up your words, and I think that's the case for Nick Bolton. And he gets fired up, but Nick Bolton isn't necessarily the guy who's super rah-rah, right? He's not super loud out there, and really he can be kind of a quiet guy at times. But first of all, players feed off of his energy when he's out there, but he also communicates effectively. And it's hard to discern between someone being very loud and communicating effectively. Some guys can do both, but Nick is a kind of a quiet guy, but yet he communicates tremendously when he's out there, and you need that from your middle linebacker, and that's why I think he can handle this responsibility. And it's just fun to think about the Chiefs linebacker core right now, because we're going to watch these guys grow before our eyes, having Willie Gay out there and Leo Chanel. It's just a very talented group of linebackers. Nick Bolton's right in the middle of it, and it's safe to say he's the leader right now of this group.
I think they've added some depth, too. They're Elijah Lee, who's a Blue Springs kid who played at K-State, was a leader at K-State. He gives them now depth, was a good player for the 49ers, especially on special teams. Darius Harris has been around a while. And you mentioned Chanel. Chanel actually fits this leadership role, too. But it's another thing I like about this rookie class. They don't feel like they're going to walk in and go, hey, watch us take over the team. You have to wait your turn. You have to learn to be effective in the National Football League as a longtime leader. So I'm fired. And I'm glad you mentioned Willie Gay Jr. I'm not going to leave him out of this discussion, because he, too, seems ready, willing, and able to take on more responsibility, not just on the field.
I remember when Willie first got drafted, it was right in the middle of COVID, and it was really difficult for those guys because they had no OTAs, no rookie minicamp, all the things that may not seem important on the outside, but for these guys, when they're trying to get ready for an NFL training camp as a rookie, they're tremendously beneficial. Just to go out there in shorts and have Coach Reed tell you a few things, you get used to stuff, right? Those are really important. I remember Willie after not having any of those things and going through his first couple practices at training camp, he was like, you know what? I'm looking at it as an advantage. Like everyone else gets those things. I didn't get it, but I'm going to be stronger because of it. And that's just a great mentality, I think. And Willie, it's been fun to watch him grow over the last couple years because he used to be kind of quiet too. But Willie is one of the most energetic guys that is on this defense now, I think. And he's just been awesome, and his play has backed it up as well. The promise of Willie Gay, the potential that he had coming out of school, we were like, he can be this true hybrid linebacker that can cover sideline to sideline. We saw that a lot last year, and he's only going to get better. And you're right, he's also a leader on this team.
So again, this Defending the Kingdom is dedicated to who leads. A lot of you have asked about it. A lot of you are concerned about it, especially on the defensive side. Offensively, you're not as concerned because you know about Patrick Mahomes. Not only is the most proficient quarterback in NFL history in his first 4 years as a starter, with his 58 wins and 16 losses and all the metrics, he's the best in NFL history with all these starts and all the starts that he's had. It's also the fact that he is a strong leader on this team. Just what he did in Dallas, taking all the guys there to work them out before they came up here to work out. The fact that he takes responsibility. We know about his consistent performance. He also waited his turn. He checks all the boxes of what has made great leaders in the National Football League over a long period of time. But I do think we overlook the fact that he waited and learned and absorbed in that initial year from Alex Smith.
I always think about this when rookie quarterbacks start early on in their rookie season. And I know everyone is always excited to see the new player that you acquired, but man, the Patrick Mahomes, Alex Smith model worked pretty well, didn't it? And most teams just aren't patient enough or don't have a willing teacher to do it. And Alex Smith is so unique in that way, and we've had a chance to see him since he was on the Chiefs when he's come back here, and he's like a proud dad when he sees, what Patrick Mahomes has become. But it was the combination of a very unique opportunity where you have a great head coach in Andy Reid, a willing teacher, and a very competent player in Alex Smith. I mean, he went out there and had, I think, his best season as a pro in 2017, and a willing learner in Patrick Mahomes. It was perfect. Most teams don't have that. But what Patrick has grown into now, learning from Alex and learning from Coach Reid, is just one of the best leaders I've ever seen. And we've seen that throughout his time in so many different ways. I think about the AFC Championship game against the Bills a couple years ago when McCole Hardman had the coat over his head, and Patrick comes back to him and says, hey, we're going to need you, and then trusts him later on and throws a touchdown pass his way. That was cool. Also, I remember last year against the Raiders in Vegas, this is a smaller profile one, but Noah Gray, I don't think it was his fault, but Noah Gray had a couple of passes that bounced off of his hands. Well, Patrick kept going his way and threw Noah Gray a touchdown in a big moment later in that drive. So Patrick in-game is a tremendous leader, but you also mentioned how he's getting the guys all together down in Texas for basically extended OTAs. Like, hey, if you want to come down and get better, like, come on down here. We have great facilities, and we'll get better together. And when you have new players like the Chiefs do, particularly on offense, they've had a chance to get to know each other before they were even in the building together. So we could have an entire hour-long podcast on the examples of leadership we've seen from Patrick, but makes me feel very good as a Chiefs fan when your superstar quarterback isn't only the best player in the NFL, he's the best leader in the NFL too.
It's easy for players to be jealous of Patrick. They're not. They love him because he just emanates that to those the rest of this whole locker room. I've noticed some teams are trying to emulate it. I think the Titans are trying to do that a little bit with Ryan Tannehill and Malik Willis. You see that they would love to do what the Chiefs have done. It's you're right. It's rare to have the teacher in Alex Smith, to have the pupil who's willing to learn in Patrick Mahomes. But there are other leaders on this offense that I think are of note here, because it's why you and I are excited about the young guys on this team. Now, Thornhill was in the class of 19. Willie Gay Jr. in the class of 20. Bolton comes in the class of 21, but he has classmates on the offensive side of the ball that fit this narrative. Creed Humphrey was born to be a longtime leader in the National Football League. He, too, checks all the boxes. He came in as a two-time captain at the University of Oklahoma. If you go back to his days at Shawnee High School in Oklahoma, where he was the leader, again, of that high school and a wrestling champion, Oklahoma almost immediately put him in a role, but he waited his turn. Remember, that's a part of leadership, is to learn and absorb, which he did. But then OU, for 2 years, made him a team captain in 2020, COVID year, and 2019. It was impressive to watch him fit into this same genre because he, too, last year absorbed and learned. He said, I've got a lot to learn to play in the National Football League. But Creed Humphrey reminds me of a Brian Dawkins kind of guy who could be not only a great player in this league, but a longtime leader.
I think it was during the Pro Bowl when Patrick Mahomes was mic'd up and talking to somebody. It might have been Max Crosby.
That's a great one.
And they're talking about Creed, and Patrick's like, man, he doesn't care about anything but football. He'll just walk around the facility just wearing Crocs. Doesn't care about anything. Just wants to be better at football. Like, Creed Humphrey is the ultimate, like, football guy. Just a football guy. That's what he is, and he's really good at it. And he demands respect when he's out there. He's not, like, barking in guys' faces, but he is out there mauling dudes, and you just respect it right away. He earned that from, like, the first day of, like, rookie minicamp when we were watching. We're like, this guy's really good. And when you're a younger player, even though Creed is only going into his second year in the NFL, when you're a younger player and you see a guy like that carrying himself the way that he does and having the success that he's already had, just going into his second year in the league, you follow that guy. And I mentioned this was important for the Chiefs, and we'll talk about Trey Smith too, but this was important for the Chiefs when they remade their offensive line to find guys like this, because it was a very necessary but dangerous thing to do when you basically replace all 5 of your starters along the offensive line. I mean, when you have guys like Eric Fisher and Mitchell Schwartz, who I mentioned earlier, that have been here a long time, that are the leaders along the offensive line, they go elsewhere. You got to find some guys not only who are good football players, but who are also going to continue on a certain culture. And these guys epitomize it. Like, the Chiefs couldn't have found a better guy to be their center than Creed Humphrey, not just because of the player that he is, but because he is the ultimate football dude in every use of the word. And I just can't wait to see what happens with Creed over the course of his career. But if you look at Pro Football Focus numbers, he was the best center in the NFL since 2017 last year, and he was just a rookie. So Creed Humphrey, pretty good at this football thing.
And when you look at the great centers in Chiefs history, E.J. Hollab, Super Bowl champion Jack Rudney, the Chiefs Ring of Honor, Tim Grunard just went up on the Ring of Honor, even Rodney Hudson in the first days of Coach Reed here. There is a long litany of center leaders, and Creed Humphrey so excited about his future, not just as a football player, but as a leader and a linchpin in the locker room here in the Chiefs Kingdom. Trey Smith also fits this narrative. All you have to do is, when you're done listening and watching this podcast, find his acceptance speech when he was the Jason Witten Collegiate Man of the Year. Trey Smith is an unbelievable dude. Trey Smith could be a civic leader, and will be probably someday, called the steal of the entire 2021 draft. That's what the experts said after they saw him, going, oh my gosh, this is a first-round talent the Chiefs got in the 6th round. You and I had glimpses when we researched him, and you've got Tennessee fans in your family, so there was a little bit more of an understanding of what Trey Smith is all about. But once he got here, once we did even a further deep dive into what he's like as a person and as a leader, this guy's off the charts. I mean, this is an incredible person who has got the ability to be a long-time leader in the National Football League.
You can find that acceptance speech on the Chiefs YouTube page. It was a feature called Before the Kingdom. Wow. One of our producers, Danny, did that, and it was awesome. You can find that on the Chiefs YouTube page, and give it a watch. Just a couple minutes, but you'll come away from it thinking, I'm proud this guy is on our team.
Your heart stops when you watch it.
Yeah. I mean,
it's incredible.
And, you know, the thing about Trey is a lot of great athletes, NFL athletes, have been really good for a long time, and they don't face adversity until they get to the NFL because they realize it's hard, and they overcome that, and it's great. But Trey Smith encountered significant adversity to the point where he didn't know if his career was going to continue. And, you know, he persevered. He fought through it. And once he figured out, I can safely continue playing football, I'm going to keep playing football because I love it. And I really admire that about him. And he didn't just go out there and say, I'm going to play again. I'm going to play at an elite level. And the fact that he went, I think, number 226 overall in the draft when he should have been probably a 1st or 2nd round pick is just crazy to me. And he is the steal of that entire draft class. But it's not just his physical ability. Once again, it's his ability mentally to fight through adversity, to not let those things weigh on his mind, and to go out there and just to maul dudes. I mean, if you watch his film from last year, he's just a mauler. He's just like Creed Humphrey. And even though he's a young player, when you have a young guy like Darian Kennard, for example, he'll come in here, and he's kind of a mauler himself. But when you get to the NFL and you see how Trey Smith, you see how Creed Humphrey, and the other guys along the offensive line, Joe Tooney, Orlando Brown Jr., you see how they're carrying themselves. You're like, all right, this is how I do things as a pro. And then you rely on your physical gifts after that. That's the beautiful thing right now about the Chiefs' offensive line is they have arguably one of the best offensive lines in all of football. They're all super young. They're all willing to teach. And they're all maulers. And to have that being your culture up front is just a great thing for the Chiefs when you're protecting Patrick Mahomes and trying to make this offense go. So Trey Smith, getting him in the 6th round, it's pretty phenomenal looking back at it a year later.
They're also all continuing to be willing to learn, all of them. And that's the thing about all these guys we mentioned, all want to continue to learn. You have to be good enough in the National Football League. We know that. That's an obvious statement. These are the best athletes in the world in many ways. But consistently winning teams in the NFL must have something else. They've got to have an internal leadership. Remember, performance precedes leadership. 2, that performance has got to be consistent. 3rd box to check is you handle flashpoints. They happen all the time. They are personal flashpoints and they are team flashpoints. And 4th, and this one is a little more sublime, you have to wait your turn. You absorb until that time comes, but when the time comes, you seize that time. And all the names that we mentioned in this episode, to me, are ready to take that step.
Yeah, it's preparation meets opportunity for a lot of these guys. And you mentioned how these guys are never satisfied. I was just thinking again about Trey last year. Mid-season, everyone's like, man, you're doing great. I mean, you were a 6th-round pick. Shouldn't have been, but you were a 6th-round pick. From day one, you've been the starter at guard, and you've looked really good. Like, how would you evaluate your performance? And he's like, I don't think I've been good at all. I mean, there's a million things I can get better at. And to have that kind of mindset as a young player, when it would be really easy to go out there and be like, people think I'm good. You know, I'm just going to ride on this. Like, I'm good. I don't have to worry about anything. He's like, no, there's a million things I have to get better at. All these guys are like that. Patrick Mahomes is like that. You would never expect that from a guy who is off to the greatest start for any quarterback in NFL history and can go out there and make video game throws like it's no big deal at all. But he's the ultimate guy that's never satisfied with his own performance. And that's why the Chiefs have been so good. They have an entire team of guys that are like that are uber talented but always want to get better. And that's the beautiful thing with this team. And there's so much young talent infused from the draft now on this squad as well that this season's going to be a lot of fun. And I think from week 1, I think this team is going to be really good. But when you see them at the end of the season and going into January, it's going to be a team that's going to be a force to be reckoned with.
Yeah, we're going to have this episode probably the same week in 2023, 24, and 25. I have a feeling we'll be talking about this 2022 class in that regard. You sleep like a baby. You sleep so soundly every night. I'll wake up and stare at the ceiling fan because I'm concerned about some certain things. But I'll tell you there's one thing I'm not concerned about is who will lead.
10, 5, touchdown! Lock it down! And the celebration begins at Arrowhead.